Hi again then guys, and welcome to the fifth instalment of Beards and Cars, the more informal series where we just chat about basically this, that and everything. And as you can see of course from the video, we've changed it up a little bit again. We've gone for a different game in the background, and I'm planning to run through a number of different games as the background video of this series, not just car games, but other stuff as well. Now this particular game is called Black Site Area 51. It's a first-person shooter based around monsters, basically, mutated creatures, that kind of thing. The current playthrough, or part of the playthrough that you're watching in this video, is from the first level of the game, set in Iraq, and I am going to be uploading a long form, so between, say, half an hour and around 50-minute episodes, 5 of them, probably in the next couple of weeks or so, where I'm playing through the whole game. It's only a 5-episode series, but for those of you who are interested to watch that, this is some of the footage that will be included. And as you will have seen, of course, from the title of this video, in this particular Beards and Cars episode, I wanted to talk about something a bit different. Still cars, but not so much to do with games, more to do with real life. Now, in the past, on the channel, I have done Q&A videos. I think I did 11 of them. I was doing them every week, I think it was. No, not every week, every month, I should say. But the problem is you burn through a lot of questions that way, and eventually, I don't know, it just doesn't feel as interesting when you're burning through it that quickly. And one of the things that would come up was preferences as far as dream cars, a dream car garage. And it's a question that petrol heads like to talk about. What's your dream car? What's your favourite car? What's your top 5, your top 10? What would your dream garage be? That kind of thing. If you had a certain budget, what would you buy? And it's a cool discussion to have. It's a cool conversation, and it's one which any car fan has probably thought about at some point. Now, I know for me, and probably for many of you guys as well, as far as dream cars go, it's very fluid as to what my preferences are. It stays roughly the same, but the importance that I give to certain cars changes over time. And that's the way it should be. As you get older, especially if you had a favourite car as a kid, it's probably, most likely, even different to what your favourite car is now. The first favourite car I can remember having was the Audi TT Quattro. I don't know why that was my favourite car, but that was back in the Gran Turismo 2 days, and for whatever reason, it was my favourite car for a while. I don't remember how long it was my favourite car for, probably not that long. The Espace F1, of course, was up there as well, the Chrysler Phaeton, even, from Gran Turismo 2. And then for quite a long time, my favourite car was the Mercedes CLK GTR road version. That was my favourite car, almost from like a... It was almost like a religious point of view. I would have that as my favourite car, and I never even considered having anything else take its place. And at that point, when the CLK GTR was my favourite car, Mercedes as a brand was my favourite brand as well. And that car was my favourite for a long time, probably until I was about maybe 15 or 16. And then at some point along the way, I found out that there was an open-top version of the CLK GTR, the CLK GTR Roadster. They only made 5 of them. It looks slightly different to the coupe. It has a different rear wing, a totally different front bumper, etc. And I love that one even more. And I'm a fan of open-top vehicles. I love open-top versions of supercars, and if I have the option, I would choose the open-top version of nearly any supercar. Not all of them, but most of them for sure. Most supercars that have the option of going without a roof, I would choose that. And I think one of the reasons why is because I would have trouble fitting into most supercars comfortably, and the fact that you can have no roof would obviously give me extra headroom, so that would be great. Stuff like a Ford GT40, for instance, I don't think I'd be able to drive one, even if I wanted to, because it's not exactly the most spacious of cars. The GT40 even less, and the GT to some degree as well. Now, the CLK GTR is a vehicle which I probably wouldn't fit in anyway, even in roadster form, because it's, well, a race car for the road. But for a number of years, that was my favourite car. And then that was taken over by the Zonda F. Again, in roadster form, especially in orange. I adore the Zonda F. Many of you guys who have been around for a while on the channel will know that I love the Zonda F. I consider it to be a perfect vehicle. I would say it's one of the very few cars ever made which I would say is a perfect car. It cannot be improved by changing anything. And I'm sure there are people who disagree with that, but one of the reasons why I would say that is because take the alternate version of it, the Cinque. They added power, they made the aero arrangement more aggressive, bigger wing, roof scoop, that kind of stuff, an exclusive paint job, and a more exclusive production run, more power, a higher price, higher performance, of course. But to me, that didn't make it better. It just made it different. I don't believe that you can improve on the basic concept of the Zonda F. It's a perfect car in every way. And I've talked about that on the channel before, and I know specifically because a couple of you guys have said that my extolling the virtues of the Zonda F caused you to consider it more as, well, the same as I do, one of the best supercars ever made. I would say it is the best supercar ever made, not because it's the fastest, because it isn't, not because it's the most exclusive or the quickest around a track, but just because it does everything you could possibly want and need from a supercar. It's exclusive, it's expensive, but not insanely expensive. It's fast enough to be considered very fast, but doesn't need to be the quickest. It's got a perfect amount of power. It's naturally aspirated, which to me is always preferred for pure driving pleasure. The handling is not necessarily beginner-friendly, but at the same time, not that difficult to drive. Most people who test drive Paganis comment on how surprisingly forgiving they are to drive, given that they are Italian supercars. And of course, the attention to detail that Horacio Pagani puts into cars like the Zonda F is incredible. They're cars which have a huge amount of thought and craftsmanship put into the parts of the car that you can't even see. Stuff like nuts and bolts, engravings on panels, all that kind of stuff which most of the drivers and owners of a car will never even look at. But it's there anyway, like a fine watch. And then you have the fact that they have what I would say is the best interior of any car ever made. There are cars with great interiors. I think Spikers have fantastic interiors. Most Aston Martins have great looking interiors, and some others as well. I think Koenigsegg's are pretty interesting looking, to say the least, inside. But for me, the combination of retro style with stuff like the belt buckle on the glove compartment, the old-fashioned wooden steering wheel with the rivets all the way around, that kind of old school feel that the car has, combined with a very gothic, almost steampunk use of metal, with the air conditioning outlets, the central console, I guess you could say, with the old-fashioned, almost aviation-style switches. It's just a great looking interior. It's a work of art, as far as I'm concerned. And there are other cars which I would say are works of art as well. The Maserati MC12 is among them. But for me, none of them surpass the Zonda F. It's just such an amazing supercar in every way. And I would say that you can sum up the Zonda F really with one word, and that is exquisite. Everything about the car is exactly that. It's above and beyond what you even knew you wanted from a supercar. And from the design point of view, well, to me, it's the best looking car ever made. I don't think it's ever been surpassed by any classic or modern vehicle, road or race car. And of course, all of that is entirely down to personal preference. Undoubtedly, loads of people prefer other vehicles. I know that on the channel I see a lot of love for vehicles like the Nissan GTR, the Lexus LFA. Astons in general are quite beloved by most people, or most petrol heads. And there's love for other vehicles like Koenigsegg's, that kind of thing as well. And everyone has their own preference, and that's the whole point of the conversation. And of course, I'd love to hear down below in the comments as well what your favourites are. But as far as specifically a dream garage and my current preferences, I did put out a countdown of my favourite cars sometime last year, I think it was. I thought about updating the list again, but when I looked at it, not much has really changed, I don't think. It's more the placement of the cars that changed rather than the content. It's basically probably the same 25 cars or so, just maybe in a slightly different order. Now, my favourite car, as some of you guys already know, is the Cizeta V16T. That has now surpassed the Zonda F for me. And to be clear, I don't consider the Cizeta to be a better car than the Zonda F. I do still think that the Zonda F is a perfect supercar, the best supercar ever made, and one of the few perfect cars ever designed. But the Cizeta is my favourite car for an entirely different reason. And I don't know about you guys, but I like to have favourites in kind of different categories, because what I would say is my dream car is totally different to my favourite car. To me, I could have a favourite car that I wouldn't necessarily need to own, which would be like the Cizeta. Although I love the Cizeta, for reasons that I'll get into in a second, I wouldn't necessarily choose it over anything else if I had the opportunity of owning any car. Because to me, a dream car is something which you'd actually choose to own, whereas a favourite car could be almost a theoretical thing. Kind of like how the Zonda F is still, in effect, my most respected car, even though it's not necessarily my favourite anymore. Now, as far as the Cizeta goes, I was introduced to that car by Gran Turismo 4, and I was actually introduced to a lot of cars thanks to that game. It started my love for Chaparral as well. But the reason why the Cizeta has become my favourite car is because, and I've mentioned this before here and there on the channel as well, but I love cars which are totally unique, that stand out from the crowd, that deliberately do not try and set their own records or anything like that. They don't care about that. All they care about is being totally unique and having their own statement, their own twist, their own niche on the market. Stuff like Paganis, Koenigsegg's, Spikers, all that kind of thing. They're totally unique vehicles. They appeal to a very specific kind of enthusiast, and they're not for everyone. They don't try to be for everyone. Something like, I don't know, like a Ford Focus or a Vauxhall Astra, that kind of thing. They're not designed to be favourites. They're designed to sell well. Whereas with cars like Spikers, they're not even trying to get big sales numbers. Companies like Caparo or Morgan, they're not trying to sell millions of cars. They specifically don't. They go in the exact opposite direction and make themselves very boutique. Now, the Cizeta is my favourite car for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons why it's my favourite is because of the reason it was made. There are many cars, especially supercars, that are made to break records. Veyrons, some Koenigsegg's, various others, the SSC Ultimate Aero, cars like that, they're designed to be the fastest. And that's the obvious way to go for a supercar. I'm going to make a supercar, how can I make it memorable? Try and be the fastest, then people will take notice of it. Others, though, don't care about that. Now, why was the Cizeta made? Was it supposed to be the fastest? No, it didn't even try to be. The acceleration time on the Cizeta in real life is something like 4.5 seconds to 60. That's not even a supercar by today's standards. That's like a hot hatch even. Seriously, there are hot hatches and sedans getting to that kind of acceleration time now, and even quicker. So back then in the early 90s, when they only built, I think it was 9 Cizeta V16Ts, the car was designed to be basically a musical instrument with a steering wheel. It was designed to sound incredible, like nothing else on the road. And incidentally, it's kind of funny because I love the look of the Cizeta. To me, the Cizeta has what I would say is a remarkably good presence. Kind of like an Aston Martin, actually. It's a car that you would want to pull up to a party in because it dominates the scene. It's got a very eye-catching silhouette, that very wide, long, low-slung stance. It just grabs attention. That's the kind of car that it is. I would say that other cars that have that would be the Aston Martin 177. That's got a lot of presence, although I'm not a huge fan of the car. And others as well have definitely got that kind of, I'm here, I own the scene kind of look. And to me, the Cizeta has that as well. It dominates wherever you park or drive it. But beyond that, I love the engine. It's a naturally aspirated 6-litre V16, mid-mounted, fairly obviously, but interestingly, the engine is actually mounted transversely. And for those who aren't familiar with stuff like that, there are basically 2 distinct ways of fitting an engine in a car. You've got longitudinal and transverse. And basically the difference between the two is that a longitudinal engine, which is what, for instance, something like a Lamborghini Murcielago has, that engine is facing, in effect, the same direction of the car. It's in line with the direction that the car is travelling. So you've got half of your pistons on one side of the car, half on the other side, in the case of a V engine. Then transverse engines, which would be like a front engine, front wheel drive hatchback, the engine is mounted sideways, which is why when you open the bonnet of some small, say Fiat Punto, that kind of thing, the engine is sideways. Most small production cars have transverse engines. They're fitted sideways because it's more efficient space-wise. And for a variety of other reasons, but that's the main one. With longitudinal engines, that tends to be bigger cars that will have that. Stuff like a muscle car, for instance, will have the engine longitudinal, or a Nissan GTR, that has a longitudinal engine. It's facing forwards with the pistons to the left and to the right of the car, not facing the front and the back of the car. The interesting thing about the Cizeta is it doesn't have that. The engine is not mounted Lambo style. It's mounted transversely, so the engine is literally sideways in the back of the car. And that's one of the reasons why the Cizeta is so wide. It's around 7 feet wide at the back. Because not only is it mounted sideways, which is crazy enough for a supercar, but it's a 16-cylinder, so it's one of the longest engines you could possibly get. And still they put it sideways. I personally love that. It makes it all the more unique, and the fact that that engine is a V16 in itself gives the Cizeta its own unique spin on the supercar scene, because the engine, which, if memory serves, is made from 2 Ferrari units put together, isn't the most powerful of engines, but purely based on the fact that it's a V16, that immediately makes the Cizeta historically significant, because to this day, the Cizeta is still the only V16 engine supercar ever produced as a road car. There have been concepts. Obviously, you've got stuff like the Cadillac 16, which was a limo. You've got V16 engine cars, again, Cadillacs mostly, from way back in the 20s and 30s, but again, they were big limos. And of course, the Veyron has 16 cylinders, as does the Chiron. But those vehicles do not have a V16, they have a W16, which is shorter and wider. So the Cizeta is still, to this day, the only factory-produced, road-going V16 engine supercar. And of course you've got some others which could come on the scene, like the Devil 16, which is supposed to be the most powerful supercar ever made, around 5,000 horsepower or whatever it is. And they have actually dyno tested that engine. It's got over 4,000 horsepower proven. So that could be a remarkable car if they do actually produce it. And the footage of that engine is actually on YouTube if you want to check it out. But for now, the Cizeta is still the only V16 engine supercar you can buy. And I love that. It's totally unique. Now, it's not slow. Even by modern standards, 205 miles per hour is not bad, especially given that it's got about 540, 550 horsepower to be working with, which is quite a bit less than most modern supercars. And I just love that. I love all of those combined things. And as far as the visuals, the design of the car, is interesting because I would say that the Cizeta is a very similar looking car to the Lamborghini Diablo and the Ferrari Testarossa. But interestingly, I don't like the Testarossa or the Diablo that much. I don't dislike them, but I've just never been a fan of them. And yet I am a fan of the Cizeta, which is weird, considering how similar they look. And on the point of the Diablo, and I'm sure many of you guys have dropped down to the comments to type this already, but the reason why the Cizeta looks so much like a Diablo is because it was designed by the same guy. And not only that, technically speaking, the Cizeta is the Lamborghini Diablo, because it was designed before the Diablo, and Lamborghini actually took that design and watered it down. They made it a bit softer, a bit safer, to make it into the Diablo. So the Cizeta is actually more authentic and closer to the original Diablo design than the Diablo is, kind of ironically. And yeah, I'm not a fan of the Diablo, but I love the Cizeta, because although the cars are very, very similar, the changes that are there, although relatively subtle, for instance having 4 pop-up headlights instead of 2, that kind of thing, just make the Cizeta so much more unique and more oddball, whereas the Diablo very much looks like it's playing it safe. It's a great looking car, don't get me wrong, it's got an amazing design, it's the essence of a supercar, but to me it's a bit expected, whereas the Cizeta is a bit more risky. Now, with that being said, I already mentioned earlier on in the video that if I actually had the opportunity to own any car in the world, I would not choose the Cizeta, because as much as I love it, It's just a car that I love, theoretically. I don't need to own it to love it. When you're talking dream cars, that's totally different for me. Because for me, a dream car is something that isn't just a piece of art to sit in a garage. It's something that looks great, sounds great, drives amazingly well, that you can have a lot of fun with, but also that I could genuinely use every day, do practical things in it if I wanted to, maybe take people out in it, friends, etc., for long distance journeys, take a trip to the Nürburgring Ring, that kind of thing, go on holiday in the car. Something that has all of that ability. And for many people, the Nissan GTR falls perfectly into that category. And I would agree, the Nissan GTR is a remarkably good daily driver exotic. Maybe even the best in terms of all-round ability, especially given its price. But that's not the one that I would choose. The one that I would choose is the Ferrari FF. And I've talked about this before on the channel. I adore the Ferrari FF. It's my favourite Ferrari, the only Ferrari which I would say I love rather than just like. And I love everything about it. I love the engine, 6.3 litre naturally aspirated V12, similar power to an Enzo. It's got about 7 or so horsepower less. Still over 650 horsepower though, top speeds over 200, 0 to 60 in not much more than 3 seconds. And again, in a similar way, funnily enough, to the Cizeta, the reason why I love the FF so much isn't just because of how practical it is combined with being a genuine supercar, but it's because of how risky it was. People take for granted how good the FF is as an all-rounder, but for Ferrari, that was a big risk to take. Not only have they never made a production all-wheel drive car before, but they'd certainly never made a shooting brake, or in other words, a sport version of a wagon or a state car before. Now, Ferrari have made wagons and shooting brakes before, but they were customs. They weren't production cars. They made some for the Sultan of Brunei, for instance. They made a 456 GT shooting brake, a 4-door wagon. You can see it on Google. Fantastic looking machine. But again, not a production car. The FF is not based on an existing vehicle. It's a ground-up production. And the risk that they took in making this all-wheel drive, naturally aspirated, big V12 engine, shooting brake style supercar, that's such a weird vehicle for Ferrari to get up and make after making stuff like the Enzo, the 599, the 458, the 430, the 360, the 456, the 612, the 575, the 550, all that kind of stuff. They are quintessentially Ferrari cars. They are basically in one of two camps. They're either hardcore sports or super sports or even supercars, or they're long-distance exotic GTs. The FF is kind of both at the same time, but at the same time, it's neither. I love that. It's a car totally in a league of its own, and if you think about it, as good as the Bentley Continental GT is, and as good as the Nissan GTR is, neither of them are actually like the FF. They're its two closest rivals. But still, the FF is actually in a league of its own. And I love that as well. Again, the Spiker factor, the Pagani factor, the Koenigsegg factor. It doesn't follow trends, it makes them. And as cliched as that sounds, it's actually a genuine statement when it comes to cars like the FF. Now, although that's my dream car, which it is, I actually kind of have two dream cars. And the reason why I have two is because I honestly don't know which one I would choose if I had the opportunity. Because I love the FF, I love everything about it, and just like the Zonda F and the Cizeta, there's not a single thing that I would change about that car. And to prove that point, I actually do not like the updated version that they made. I think it's the GTC4 Lusso, or whatever it's called, the more powerful version of the FF, basically. I don't like that car. I don't like the look, I don't like what they did to the performance. To me, it's an unnecessary change. Now, some people, of course, like it. I just don't need that car. I love the FF the way it is. The last thing it needed was more power. And due to the length of this video, I think I'm going to have to leave my other dream car for probably the next episode. But it's another car which is similar to the FF in some ways in terms of that exotic usability, the practicality factor. But again, it's totally different, and it's another car which really is totally in a league of its own. But that's it overall for this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.